I remember the way the dining room felt that night, warm with the scent of roasted ham and cinnamon rolls, the kind of smell that usually meant comfort and togetherness. But all I felt was the tightness in my chest and the way my pulse kept fluttering in my ears. Christmas in Denver was always cold, the kind of cold that nipped at your skin and slipped under your coat. But that year, the cold felt like it had followed me indoors. Just before everything fell apart, I caught myself wondering something simple. What are you doing while listening to this story right now? For me, on that night, I was sitting at a long oak table between relatives who pretended not to see, the tension stretching across the room like a wire pulled too tight. I was 18, old enough to pack a bag and run if I wanted, but still young enough to feel the familiar sting of hoping my dad would look at me differently. I had seen Howard simmering all day, pacing the kitchen, wiping invisible crumbs from the counter, adjusting the silverware as if the forks themselves would betray him. Every few minutes he shot me that cold look he thought no one else noticed. I felt each glance like a tap on the shoulder, telling me I did not belong. Emma was across the table, trying to catch my eye, her brows pulled together. She was 12 and too perceptive for her own comfort. She could read the mood in the room faster than most adults. I saw the way she kept fidgeting with her napkin, probably sensing that something was coming. I wished I could quietly tell her everything was fine, but I had learned years earlier that pretending never stopped the blow from landing. The conversation around me rose and fell. A cousin talked about a new job back in Fort Collins. An aunt told a story about her cat knocking down the Christmas tree. People laughed, glasses clinked, forks tapped against plates. It all sounded distant to me. My eyes drifted down to my hands, resting on my lap, fingers cold despite the heat from the fireplace. Howard cleared his throat. The kind of throat clearing that meant he wanted attention more than he needed to clear anything. The room quieted a little. I lifted my head. His jaw was tight, the muscle near his ear pulsing. I knew that look. I had lived under that look. He pushed back his chair. It scraped across the hardwood floor. Everyone turned to him. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a single bill, folded in half. He did not toss it gently. He flicked it across the table and it skidded to a stop in front of my plate. $20. A single 20 for 18 years of being tolerated in his house. Get out. I am done taking care of another man's mistake. A bastard I never wanted. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The words sliced clean through every sound in the room. For a moment, the only thing I heard was the faint hum of the furnace and my own heartbeat crashing against my ribs. No one spoke. Someone to my right gasped a little. Someone else whispered my name. I kept my eyes on Howard. He looked proud of himself, the kind of pride that twisted his mouth into a smirk. He thought this was the moment. He finally cut the last thread that tied us together. He thought humiliation would finish me. I swallowed the sting in my throat and stood up slowly. My chair barely made a sound. I did not want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I slipped on my winter glove, fingers steady even though the air around me felt sharp. Fine, I said. If you are done, then you should know my real dad is outside. The room cracked open with shock. Heads turned toward the front windows. Howard froze like someone had hit pause on him. The smirk faded. His eyes narrowed just slightly, enough for me to see panic blooming underneath all that anger. He turned his head, stiff and slow, toward the window behind him. And there it was, the silhouette of a dark luxury sedan parked at the curb, the faint beam of headlights reflecting on the snow, and the figure standing beside the passenger door, waiting. Howard looked back at me, and for the first time in my life, his face held something I had never seen in him. Fear. Not of losing me, but of what my leaving might reveal about him. Are you serious? He muttered, and his voice cracked in the middle. I stepped away from the table. People shifted their chairs to let me pass. Someone whispered, "God help her," under their breath. Emma stood up, as if she might follow me, but she caught Howard watching her and froze in place. I walked into the entryway, picked up my coat, and slid my arms into the sleeves. The house behind me buzzed with the low hum of relatives trying to figure out what to say, what to believe, what this moment meant. But their voices blended together until they were nothing more than background noise. When I opened the front door, winter air rushed in, sharp and clean. Snow sat in soft piles along the walkway. My breath drifted white in the air. He was standing there under the glow of the porch light. Michael Hale, the man I had only met a few times in my life, the man who did not know I existed for 16 years, the man whose eyes carried the same shade of blue mine did. He looked up as I stepped outside, and something in his expression softened. No pity, not fear, something warmer. Recognition, maybe. Relief. The feeling of finally correcting a wrong that had sat too long in the shadows. "Athena," he said, voice low, steady. Behind me, through the front window, I saw Howard still standing at the end of the dining table, like a man watching, a piece of his world slide out of his control. I took a breath, one that tasted like cold air and freedom. Then I stepped forward toward Michael. If you have ever lived through a Christmas you wished you could forget, stay with me. The night everything changed was only the beginning. But the first crack in my world came much earlier, long before I knew what the word mistake could do to a child. I was 10 the first time I realized something was wrong with the way my dad looked at me. Back then, I still called him Dad in my head, and sometimes out loud when I forgot to be careful. We lived in a small blue house on the south side of town, the kind of place with a chain-link fence and a maple tree that dropped leaves all over the yard in the fall. My mom, Laura, tried to make it feel cozy, with candles and hand-sewn curtains. She would say that as long as the kitchen was warm and the girls were laughing, it did not matter what the outside looked like. Emma was 4 that year. All pigtails and peanut butter fingerprints. She followed me everywhere, tugging on the hem of my shirt, asking me to play house or school or make doctors believe. When I think back on that time, I see the two of us sitting on the living room carpet, surrounded by dolls, while the television murmured some old sitcom in the background and Mom hummed. In the kitchen, on the surface, we probably looked like one of those normal families you see in holiday commercials. Mom cooking, 2 girls playing, a man coming home from work in a tired suit. But there was always a tension around my dad that I could feel, even if I could not understand it. He would come in through the front door, and his whole face would soften when he saw Emma. He would scoop her up and spin her around, kiss the top of her head, and ask about her day. When his eyes slid past me, the warmth faded a little. He would nod, maybe say a short greeting, then move on. At 10 years old, you notice things like that. You do not have the vocabulary to name them, but your body keeps the score. You start standing a little farther from his chair. You stop reaching for his hand in crowded parking lots. You learn to read the room before you speak. One night in particular clings to me like smoke. It was late, one of those winter nights when the air feels heavy and still. Snow had fallen earlier, and the street outside the window lamp looked quiet and clean. I had been asleep, but I woke up thirsty, my mouth dry from the heater running too high. The house was mostly dark, except for a thin strip of light spilling out from the kitchen downstairs. I could hear low voices, my mom's and my dad's, blending with the soft hum of the refrigerator. I pushed back my blanket, slid my feet into the slippers Mom had bought me at the thrift store, and crept out into the hallway. Emma was asleep in the small bed across from mine, curled around her stuffed bear, her soft snores rising and falling. The old stairs creaked under my weight, no matter how careful I tried to be. I held the handrail and took each step slowly, placing my toes on the edges that squeaked less. The closer I got to the kitchen, the clearer their voices became. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, behind the wall that separated the hallway from the kitchen doorway. I could see a slice of the room if I leaned just right. The overhead light cast a yellow glow over everything. Mom was sitting at the table in her robe, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. She looked tired, the kind of tired that goes down into your bones. There were dark smudges under her eyes, and her shoulders slumped, as if she were carrying more than just the weight of the day. Dad was standing by the sink with his hands braced on the counter, staring out the small window above it at the dark backyard. His posture was stiff, like someone holding himself together by sheer will. I meant to just walk in, say I was thirsty, and grab a glass of water. But then I heard him speak, and my feet stayed glued to the floor. He said that he could not stand raising someone else's blood. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. The words hit me like a cold splash down my back. My 10-year-old brain tried to reorganize them into something else, something less sharp, but they just echoed louder. I cannot keep doing this, he went on, voice low and hard. "Every time I look at her, it reminds me of what you did before me." My mom flinched as if he had reached across the table and slapped her. She pressed her hands together, fingers laced so tightly her knuckles went white. She told him that he knew from the beginning that she had never lied about the past, that he chose this. He shook his head, still facing the window. He said, "Choosing something does not make it easier, not when everyone in this town remembers who I was before and who you were with before." He said, "People talk," and he was the one who had to hear it at work and at the bar and at the store. My mom's voice broke when she answered. She reminded him that her health was not what it used to be, that the doctors were watching a few things, that she needed stability for the girls. She said she needed a man in the house, not just for money, but for protection, for partnership. She said that Emma and I both needed him, that I especially needed him to be kind, because none of this was my fault. Hearing my name in that context made my stomach twist. I pressed myself closer to the wall, afraid that if I moved the wrong way, the floor would groan and they would see me. My dad finally turned away from the window and faced her. His face looked older in the harsh kitchen light. Lines etched deeper around his mouth. His eyes were flat, like a door had shut behind them. He said it was easy for her to ask for patience when she was not the one everyone whispered about. He said that every time my teacher told him I was doing well in school, all he could think about was that I was someone else before I was his. The words did not entirely make sense to me, but the tone did. It was the same tone he used when the car would not start, or when the bills came in higher than expected. Frustration, resentment, something sour that had been brewing a long time. My mom stood then, slowly, like her body ached. She walked around the table and stopped beside him. She laid a hand on his arm. Her voice softened. She admitted she had made mistakes before him, but she reminded him that he had made a vow to her and to both girls. She asked him, gently, to remember the nights he had rocked me to sleep when I was a toddler, before Emma was even born. She asked if he remembered teaching me to ride a bike, how I had looked back at him, trusting. His jaw worked side to side. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt. Then he pulled his arm away from her touch. He said he was tired of pretending, tired of feeling like half a dad in his own house. He said that when he looked at Emma, he saw himself, his nose, his brown hair, his grin. And when he looked at me, he saw a life he did not live, a man he never met, a history that did not belong to him. Something inside me went very still. I felt like I was floating just above my own body, watching a scene that was happening to some other girl. Mom covered her face with her hands for a moment, then dropped them and looked at him, eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. She said that I did not ask to be born, that it was cruel to talk about me that way, even in the safety of a late-night kitchen. He heard the word cruel, and his eyes hardened. He said she had no idea how cruel it was to be reminded every day that he was, second to someone whose name still floated around town like a ghost. The silence that followed was so heavy I thought it might crush me. My throat burned. My eyes stung. I wanted to run back upstairs and crawl under my covers and pretend this night never happened. My foot shifted on the step, and the wood betrayed me with a sharp creak. Their heads snapped in my direction at the same time. For a heartbeat, none of us moved. Mom looked terrified. Dad just stared. I stepped around the corner into the doorway. I could not think of a lie fast enough. So I told the truth. I said I had been thirsty. My voice came out small, like it belonged to a much younger child. Mom rushed to grab a glass, her hands shaking a little as she filled it at the sink. She smiled too wide, too bright, the way adults do when they want to convince a child that everything is fine. Dad did not smile. His face closed off like a door slamming shut. There was no anger on the surface, no explosion. That almost would have been easier. What I saw instead was a coldness that settled into his eyes, something calculating. At that moment, I knew he heard enough to realize I had been standing there for a while. He told me I should be in bed, that it was late, and I had school in the morning. His voice was calm, but there was nothing soft in it. I took the glass from Mom and drank the water as quickly as I could without choking. My hands trembled so badly I had to set the glass down with both palms. On my way back up the stairs, I felt his gaze on my back. It burned between my shoulder blades. I did not have the words for it then, but I understand now that this was the night something fundamental shifted. I was not just the older girl in the house anymore. I was the reminder of a story my dad wished he could erase. By the time I reached the top step, I knew that whatever love he had once tried to feel for me had become something else. Something colder. I still wanted him to choose me anyway, but life rarely bends itself around the wants of a child. That truth settled deeper 2 years later, when everything I knew about safety disappeared for good. I was 12 when my mom died. 12. And still young enough to believe that if you wished hard enough, grown-ups would come home from hospitals the way they left. But the world does not work like that, and cancer does not listen to the prayers of little girls pacing the hallway outside a dim hospital room. She had been sick for 8 long months. 8 months of quiet conversations behind closed doors and meals left untouched on the kitchen counter. 8 months of soft beeping machines and the faint smell of antiseptic on her clothes. I remember sitting beside her bed in the living room after she was too weak to climb the stairs, reading Charlotte's Web in a shaky voice, while she smiled at me and stroked my hair with fingers that felt thinner every week. She kept her fear from us as best she could. She laughed when Emma danced around the room, even when laughing sent her into coughing fits. She squeezed my hand when she caught me staring too long at the bruises blooming across her arms. She still told us stories at bedtime, even when the words came out slow and broken. The night she passed, the house felt too quiet. Howard stood in the doorway of her room with his arms crossed, his face pale. He did not touch her hand or brush her hair back. He just stared at her, as if he were trying to memorize something before it vanished. The funeral happened fast, faster than I expected. It was simple, almost plain, a small gathering at a modest funeral home near the edge of Aurora. Howard said she would not have wanted anything fancy. I remember thinking that she deserved more than a quick service and a handful of flowers placed on a cold plot of grass. But I was a child. I did not get to decide that. Emma was 6 and clung to me like a shadow. She cried into my shirt until it was damp, asking when Mom would come back, asking why she had to leave us. I held her and whispered the only thing I could think of. I told her Mom loved us. I told her she was not hurting anymore. I told her things I was not sure I believed in myself. After the funeral, Howard became quieter. Not kinder, just quieter. He moved through the house like someone carrying a load too heavy to set down. For a short while, I mistook his silence for grief. Maybe it was. Maybe it was something else. One afternoon, a few days after the burial, I came home from school to find him locking the door to the small spare room at the end of the hallway. It had been Mom's sewing room, filled with fabrics and old magazines, and the soft hum of her machine when she worked late at night. He slipped the key into his pocket and turned around when he heard me. His face looked tight. "This room stays closed now," he said. I asked him why. I could hear my own voice shaking. He said he did not want people picking through her things, that it was better this way. Then he walked past me and down the hall without another word. For weeks after that, the locked door felt like a wall between us and her memory, like he had sealed her away, hidden the pieces of her the same way he hid the anger that simmered under his skin. But grief makes children bold, even reckless. One evening, when Howard went out to pick up takeout, I looked through the junk drawer in the kitchen and found the small ring of spare keys he always tossed there. I tried each one until a thin silver key clicked in the lock. I opened the door slowly. Dust motes floated in the late afternoon light spilling through the narrow window. Her sewing machine sat covered in a sheet. Her dresses hung neatly in the closet. There were jars of buttons, stacks of folded fabric, and a coffee mug she used for pins. The room still smelled faintly of her perfume, light and floral. My throat tightened. Emma slipped in behind me and took my hand without saying anything. We walked around silently, touching things as if they were made of glass. On the top shelf of the closet, tucked beside a shoebox of old photos, I found a small wooden jewelry box. Its lid was carved with tiny vines and flowers. I lifted it down and sat on the carpet with Emma beside me. Inside were her treasures: a pair of pearl earrings, a silver bracelet she wore on special occasions, a simple gold chain that still carried the warmth of her skin in my memory. I knew immediately I could not let Howard lock these things away forever. I closed the lid and held the box tight against my chest. I whispered to Emma that we could not tell anyone, that this was ours to keep. She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. I hid the jewelry box in the back of my own closet, behind a stack of old sweaters. I checked on it every night for weeks, afraid someone might discover it. It became the one thing that felt like a connection to her that no one could take. Time kept moving. Seasons shifted. Howard stopped mentioning Mom. He painted over the marks she left on the wall where she measured our heights. He rearranged the living room. He shut down any conversation that lingered too long on her memory. But the jewelry box stayed hidden, waiting. Years later, when I turned 16, I opened it again on a quiet Sunday morning. The house was empty. Emma was at a friend's sleepover. Howard had gone to the hardware store. I sat on my bedroom floor with the box in my lap, the same way I had that first day in the sewing room. This time, beneath the velvet lining, I found an envelope I had never noticed before. It was thin, yellowed at the edges, my name written across the front in her handwriting. My hands trembled as I slid my thumb under the flap. I did not know yet that her words would change everything. I did not know yet that inside that envelope was the truth about where I came from, about the man who had loved her before Howard, about the blood my dad could not stand raising. But I remember the moment before I unfolded the letter, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor, sunlight warming the carpet, the house still and quiet, my heart beating slow and heavy. I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, this was the closest I would ever come to hearing her voice again. I sat there with the letter in my hands, feeling the weight of the paper as if it were something heavier than ink. And fibers. My fingertips had gone a little numb. For a long moment, I simply stared at my name, written in my mom's handwriting, looping and familiar, before I finally unfolded the pages. The words blurred at first, not from age, but from the way my eyes filled without my permission. I wiped at them with the back of my hand and forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, tracing each line as if I were afraid I might miss something if I rushed. She started by telling me she loved me. That part came first, and I clung to it. She wrote that if I was reading her letter, it meant time had done what it always does, and carried her away from my side. She said she hoped I was sitting somewhere safe when I opened it, that I was old enough to hear the truth, and strong enough not to let it break me. Then she told me about a man named Michael Hale. She wrote that before she ever met Howard, when she was still in her 20s and living in a tiny apartment in downtown Denver, she had fallen in love with a man who worked too many hours and still, somehow, found time to make her laugh so hard her sides hurt. His name was Michael, she said, and he was stubborn and driven and kind in a way that surprised her every day. They had planned a future together, the kind of future young people plan when they think the world will adjust itself to their hopes. He talked about building a company. She talked about teaching and maybe going back to school herself. There were late-night drives up to the foothills, cheap coffee, small gifts that had more thought than price behind them. Then something went wrong. She did not spell out every detail. She simply wrote that there was a misunderstanding, a fight that grew too large and too loud. Pride on both sides. Michael was offered a position out of state. He left, believing she had chosen someone else, and she let him go, believing he had chosen his dreams over her. It was only after he left, she said, that she discovered she was pregnant. She admitted that fear had gripped her then. Fear of being a single mom with a body the doctors already worried about. Fear of raising a child alone while juggling bills and medications and work. Fear of calling a man who had walked away and asking him to come back for a responsibility he did not know he had. She wrote that around that time she met Howard. He was steady, dependable, a familiar face at the pharmacy and the coffee shop and the community center where she volunteered. He listened to her in a way that felt safe. He told her he wanted a family. She told him the truth, that she was expecting, and that the baby was not his. He married her anyway. She did not sugarcoat that part. She said he did something selfless then, that he chose to step into a situation that many men would have run from. He went with her to appointments. He painted the nursery. He held her hand when labor pains started, and stayed by her side when I came into the world. But somewhere along the way, something shifted inside him. She wrote that she saw the change slowly, like watching a shadow creep across a room as evening falls. He became more distant when he thought she was not looking. He stared at me sometimes with a look she could not quite read. She sensed resentment, but did not know where it was rooted. She found the truth one afternoon when she stumbled across a crumpled envelope in the trash from a private lab in the city. A paternity test. She did not explain exactly how he had done it, only that he had managed to get enough of my DNA, maybe a strand of hair or a swab, and sent it off on his own. The results had confirmed what she already knew. I was not his biological child. From that day on, she wrote, his struggle to accept me deepened. He never said the words directly to her at first, but she could feel the distance hardening. She tried to talk to him about it. She reminded him that he had known from the beginning that he had promised to love both of her girls, that biology did not determine parenthood. She also admitted something else. Her health was already starting to fail even then. The doctors had warned her about some things in her blood work, some signs they did not like. She told me that was part of why she stayed, why she did not tell Michael, why she clung to the idea of a complete household with two parents, even if one of them struggled to accept the role fully. She wrote that she wished she had done things differently. She wished she had called Michael when she found out she was pregnant. She wished she had given him a chance to know about me, to decide for himself whether he wanted to be there. She wished she had not put so much weight on her fear and so little on her own worth. At the bottom of the second page, she finally wrote the words that made my vision go white around the edges. She told me that Michael Hale was my biological dad. She said he still lived in Colorado, that he had built his own company, that she had followed his career quietly from a distance, clipping articles and watching interviews online, smiling whenever she saw the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. She told me that if I ever wanted to find him, I would have the right to do so. She did not push me. She simply left the choice in my hands. The last part of the letter was for me, and me alone. She begged me not to let anyone tell me I was less because of the story of my birth. She said I was wanted from the moment she knew I was there. She said I was not an accident, not a burden, not a symbol of a mistake. I was, in her words, the best thing she ever did in this world. By the time I finished reading, the paper in my hands was damp from tears. I held it to my chest and rocked slightly on the floor without realizing I was moving, trying to make sense of this new map of my life. So I was not Howard's by blood. Some part of me had suspected, but seeing it written in my mom's careful script made it real in a way that no overheard argument ever could. I suddenly understood why his eyes had gone cold that night in the kitchen. Why does every praise from my teachers seem to irritate him instead of making him proud? Why Emma's report cards went in the fridge and mine went in a drawer. For a few days, I kept the letter hidden in the jewelry box, pulled it out when the house was quiet, just to trace the writing with my fingers. Then a nervous thought lodged itself in my mind. If anything happened to the original, I would lose her words forever. On a Tuesday afternoon after school, I went to the library and used the old photocopier near the back wall. My hands shook so badly, it took me 3 tries to align the page correctly. When the machine whirred and a fresh, crisp copy slid out, I folded it carefully and slipped it into a notebook, leaving the original safe at home. I told myself it was simply smart to have a backup. I never expected the copy to be the thing that betrayed me. It happened a few weeks later. I had left that notebook on my desk one evening when I rushed out the door to my shift at the grocery store. Emma was at a friend's house down the street. Howard was home alone. He rarely went into my room. He considered it my mess to deal with. But that night, for reasons I still do not fully know, he did. Maybe he was looking for dirty clothes. Maybe he was checking my drawers the way suspicious parents do. Maybe he was bored. When I came home, the house was darker than usual. The television was off. The only light came from the kitchen. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and stepped inside, calling out softly. He was sitting at the table with a single sheet of paper in front of him, flattened carefully, like evidence in a crime show. His elbows rested on the table, his hands clasped under his chin. He did not look at me right away. My stomach dropped. Even from the doorway, I recognized the outline of the paragraphs. My mom's handwriting was translated into stark black and white by the copier. He had found the copy. When he finally raised his eyes to mine, whatever softness he had ever once tried to muster for me was gone. There was no confusion there, no surprise, only a hard, simmering fury. The kind that had been building for years and finally had a place to land. In that moment, standing on the worn linoleum with my work shoes squeaking and my heart punching against my rib, I knew that every unspoken resentment he had ever carried now had confirmation stamped across it. He knew that I knew. He was not going to pretend anymore, and the silence between us thickened until it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator behind him, the ticking of the clock on the wall, even the small crackle of the furnace kicking on. Everything sounded louder, sharper, like my senses were trying to warn me I had crossed into dangerous territory. He tapped the letter with one finger. His voice came out low and controlled, the kind of voice that makes every instinct in a person go still. So, you know, I could not speak. My throat felt tight, like someone had tied a rope around it. I nodded once, barely. He leaned back in the chair and exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. I waited to yell. I waited for the explosion. Instead, he smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the kind that told you he had been waiting years for something to justify the way he already felt. Things changed after that. He stopped pretending we were a family unit. He stopped asking whether I needed anything. He stopped trying to mask the way he favored Emma. And little by little, the house reshaped itself around that truth. But the worst of it did not come until a few months later, when my Aunt Grace sat me down at her kitchen table and told me something that shifted the ground under my feet all over again. It was late spring. I had walked to her place because Howard had taken the car and Emma was at a birthday party. Grace lived in a small brick house in Lakewood with mismatched furniture and a porch swing that always smelled faintly of pine needles. She made tea in the chipped blue kettle she had used for as long as I could remember. "Athena," she said while sliding a mug toward me, "we need to talk about something your mom set up before she passed." I wrapped my fingers around the warm ceramic. The steam rose between us, and for a moment, I wondered if this would be another quiet memory about Mom, something soft and gentle. But Grace's expression told me otherwise. She looked tired, worried, determined not to let the truth sit any longer. She told me Mom had taken out a life insurance policy worth $1 million a few years before she died. I blinked at that, stunned. My mom had been careful with money, sometimes painfully so. I remembered her clipping coupons, stretching leftovers, warming the house with an old space heater instead of turning up the furnace. I never once imagined she had secured something that big for our future. Grace said the payout had been split between Emma and me, half for each girl. But because I had been under 18 when Mom died, the funds meant for me went into a protected account managed by a guardian, and that guardian was Howard. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Grace reached for a folder on the counter and slid it across the table. Her hands shook just slightly as she opened it. Inside were statements printed on plain white paper, numbers representing months and years of withdrawals. Not small ones either, steady chunks. $10,000 here, $5,000 there, then a sudden withdrawal of nearly $20,000 after I turned 15. In total, she said quietly, he has taken $150,000 from your portion. The number did not register at first. My brain tried to click into place, but it kept sliding off the edges of the truth. I stared at the columns. I read the reasons listed beside each transaction. Educational expenses, medical costs, household necessities. A sick feeling spread through me. I whispered that none of it made sense. I paid for my own clothes from my part-time job at the grocery store. I covered most of my school supplies. I packed my own lunches and bought my own winter coat when I outgrew the old one. Howard had even cut off my cell phone for a full year, claiming the bill was too high. I walked to work in the snow. I borrowed friends' phones to check in with Emma after school. And yet there were withdrawals listed under communication expenses. Grace closed the folder gently and placed her hand over mine. I know, sweetheart. I know you have been carrying far more than any teenager should. My eyes stung. The truth was not simply that he had taken money. It was that he had taken what my mom had sacrificed to leave for me, the last safety she could provide, and used it without hesitation. And he had done it while insisting I contribute more, while telling me there was no room in the budget for anything I needed, while scolding me about lights left on or toothpaste squeezed wrong. Grace told me she confronted him once, years back, when she saw the first large withdrawal. He had brushed her off, saying it was none of her business and that everything he spent was for the good of the household. She said she had wanted to fight harder, but without me being 18, she had no legal footing. Everything was in his hands. I asked her why she never told me sooner. She sighed and looked down at her mug. Your mom did not want you burdened, and after she passed, there was already so much falling apart. You were 12, then 13, then 14. Every time I thought you might be ready, something else was happening. I did not want to break your trust in the only parent you had left. I wanted to be angry with her for withholding the truth, but I could not be. I understood why she had done it. I understood the impossible choice she had faced. She had tried to protect me in the only way she knew how. I stared at the papers again. The withdrawals continued all the way through my 17th birthday. And then Grace said something that made every hair on my arms stand up. Your 18th birthday is coming soon. When that happens, the remaining money legally becomes yours, not his. He knows that. And based on what I have seen, I would not put it past him to try and use whatever he can before the deadline arrives. A cold weight settled in my stomach. I had seen it myself, the way he had grown more possessive over the finances, more insistent on handling every piece of mail, more irritable whenever I asked about college or savings. It suddenly made sense why he had pushed me to work extra shifts. Why did he make me ask him for gas money, even though Mom's policy should have covered more than enough for the both of us? Why did he refuse to let me access even a single statement of the account? He was draining what belonged to me. Quietly. Steadily, planning perhaps to finish the job before I turned 18. In that moment, sitting at Grace's table with the papers spread like a map of betrayal between us, I felt something inside me shift again. A small, burning clarity took root. For the first time, I saw Howard not as the man who raised me, not as the dad I had once wanted to impress, but as a man who had used everything he could to keep me small and voiceless. Grace squeezed my hand. You have to be careful, she said. He is unpredictable when he feels threatened, and when money is involved, he becomes someone I barely recognize. I nodded, though my mind was racing with fear and fury. I asked how much money remained in the account. She said she could not know for sure without official access, but based on the payout and the withdrawals, most of it should still be there. If he has not touched it this week, she added softly. I pressed my palms against my knees, trying to ground myself. The room felt too warm, too close. The kettle clicked softly as it cooled. Outside, a dog barked from somewhere down the street. Life continued, indifferent to the way mine had just tilted off its axis. When I finally stood to leave, Grace hugged me longer than usual. She whispered that she would stand beside me, no matter what happened next. I believed her. She was one of the few people left whom I did trust. Walking home that evening, the sky shifting from gold to pink to deep blue, I could not shake the feeling that time was running out. My 18th birthday was only a few months away. If Howard was going to take more, he would do it soon. I stepped through the front door of the house, hearing the familiar creak of the hinges. Howard was in the living room, pretending to watch television, but his eyes flicked to me the moment I entered. For the first time, I looked back at him and saw the truth, clear as day. He was not just angry with me. He was afraid I might one day have power he could not control. And the closer I moved toward adulthood, the more obvious that fear became. Senior year was supposed to be hopeful. That is what all the brochures and guidance counselors promised. They said it would be a season of new beginnings and possibilities, of campus tours and acceptance letters taped to bedroom walls. For me, it felt more like walking across thin ice, listening for cracks beneath my feet. I threw myself into applications anyway. It was the one thing I could control. I stayed up late at the kitchen table after closing shifts at the grocery store, filling out online forms and rewriting the same essay until the words felt worn smooth. I told the story of growing up with limited resources, of helping raise my little sister, of wanting to study business so I could one day build something of my own. The University of Colorado in Boulder became my quiet dream. It was far enough from our house in Aurora to feel like a fresh start, but close enough that I would still be in the same state as Emma and Aunt Grace. I could picture myself walking across that campus, mountains rising in the distance, air crisp and clean. When my counselor mentioned a need-based scholarship program tied to the university, something in me sat up straighter. She said that students from difficult financial backgrounds could apply for extra support, that they offered not just money, but mentoring and internships. She put a packet in my hands and said I would be a strong candidate. The only catch was timing. There was a special track with early consideration. The university would send a letter asking for additional documents, and the deadline would be firm. There was, she said, no wiggle room. I walked home that afternoon with the packet clutched to my chest, the paper edges digging into my palms. For a brief day or two, hope outweighed fear. At home, Howard sat in his usual spot in the living room, television glowing in front of him. I told him I was applying to Boulder. He did not look away from the screen. He asked how I planned to pay for it. I said there were scholarships, that Mom had left money, that I was working. He snorted softly and muttered something about kids thinking college money grew on trees. The conversation ended there. It was not the enthusiastic support you see in commercials, dads hugging their daughters and taking photos in front of campus signs. But I had stopped expecting that years ago. Weeks rolled by. I checked the mailbox every day after school out of habit. The metal box sat at the curb, leaning slightly, its red flag always a little crooked. Most days it held nothing but grocery flyers and bills with Howard's name on them. Once in a while there was a letter for Emma about a band fundraiser or a field trip. Every time I saw the university logo in my mind, my heart sped up. Every day the box was empty of it. My chest tightened a little more. When winter came, ice glazed the sidewalk and my breath came in clouds as I trudged down to the street in the early evenings. I told myself the mail could be delayed because of the weather. I told myself offices were busy, that they had many students to process. It was easier than considering the alternative. Inside the house, I noticed small things. Howard started getting to the mailbox before me, especially on days he left work early. He would bring in a stack of envelopes and sort them quickly at the counter, his body angled to block my view. He tossed junk into the trash and slipped the rest into a drawer. If something looked official, it went into the drawer faster. One afternoon, he came in with a handful of mail while I was washing dishes. I reached for one thick envelope that had slid to the side, but he tapped my hand away with 2 fingers. He said that if anything came for me, he would let me know. His eyes did not match his words. I tried to push down the suspicion curling in my stomach. I hated feeling paranoid. I wanted to be wrong. The letter never came. By mid-January, I felt like I was holding my breath every hour of the day. I logged into the application portal whenever I could find a quiet computer at school. It showed that my general admission file was complete, but a note about the special scholarship process still read, "Documents pending, no link, no further instructions." Maybe they had decided I was not a good fit. Maybe I had misunderstood the counselor. Maybe my essay was weaker than I thought. I started to adjust, quietly, to the idea that I might have to go to community college instead, that the scholarship was a dream too big for a girl who bagged groceries and hid her mom's jewelry box in the back of her closet. The truth came out in the ugliest, simplest way. On an ordinary Thursday, when Emma dropped a pencil, we were in the dining room after school. Books spread across the table. Snow clung to our boots in wet clumps, melting onto the mat near the door. The late afternoon light made everything look softer, almost gentle. Emma was digging in the junk drawer in the corner for a sharper pencil when one rolled off the edge and disappeared under the small cabinet where Howard kept extra placemats. She got down on her knees to reach for it, grumbling. A second later, she said my name in a strange voice. I looked up from my math homework. She was still kneeling, half under the cabinet, her fingers curled around something. She pulled it out and stood, slowly. In her hand was a slightly crumpled white envelope, smudged at the corners where it had gathered dust. The return address at the top left made my heart stop. University of Colorado Boulder, Office of Financial Aid. I could not breathe for a moment. The room tunneled in, every sound dull and far away. Emma frowned and turned the envelope over. My name was printed clearly across the front. She looked at me, confusion clouding her face. "Did you drop this?" she asked. Before I could answer, Howard walked in from the hallway. He saw her holding the envelope and went very still. It was only a flicker, a pause no longer than a breath, but I saw it. Emma noticed too. She said that she had found it under the cabinet and asked why it had my name on it. Howard's mouth tightened. He said he had been meaning to give that to me, that it must have slipped and fallen. It was a weak lie. Even Emma, 16 at the time, and still wanting to believe the best about her dad, heard the strain in it. My hands felt like they belonged to someone else as I reached for them. Envelope. The seal was still intact. I tore it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a printed letter and a single page detailing next steps. The letter was dated 3 weeks earlier. The university thanked me for my application and informed me that I had been selected to move forward in the need-based scholarship process. They requested additional documentation, including tax forms and a written explanation of my living situation. A line near the bottom stated that all materials must be received by a certain date. That date had passed 5 days ago. The words swam on the page. I sank slowly into the nearest chair. Emma took the paper from my limp hand and read it. Her face shifted from confusion to disbelief to anger, like storm clouds rolling in. She turned on Howard. "You had this," she said quietly, "and you did not give it to her." He bristled. He said she was overreacting, that it had been misplaced, that the scholarship probably was not a sure thing anyway. He said it was better for me not to get my hopes up about something that might never happen. Emma shook her head. She pointed out the date. She pointed out the deadline that had already come and gone. She said that by keeping this from me, he had made sure I could not even try. His patience snapped. He raised his voice, telling her to watch her tone, telling her that he was the one paying the bills, that he would not be lectured in his own house by a teenager who did not understand how the real world worked. But Emma did not back down. She stepped closer, cheeks flushed, eyes bright with fury and hurt. She said that she knew for a fact I had been checking the mailbox every day, hoping for this letter. She said she knew I had been working double shifts to save for college because he claimed there was no money. She said that what he did was cruel. He looked at her then the way he had looked at me so many times, with that cold, flat stare that stripped the warmth off any room. He said that she had no idea what it was like to live with a reminder of someone else's choices. Then he said the words out loud, for the first time, in front of both of us. He said that I was not his, that I had never been his, that I was someone else's problem he had been stuck with for far too long. The room went silent. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to pause. Emma turned to look at me, eyes wide, her whole world tilting in an instant. She whispered that he did not mean it, that he was just angry. I did not have the heart to tell her that he meant every syllable. I sat there with the letter from Boulder in my lap, feeling the opportunity it held dissolve like sugar in hot water. For the second time in a matter of months, I learned that my life had been deliberately redirected by the man who claimed to be my dad. And something inside me, some last soft place that still believed he would one day choose me, finally began to close. That soft place in me finally began to close, and in the space where it had been, something else started to grow. It was not anger at first, not exactly. It was more like a clear line I could suddenly see, one that separated what I could not change from what I might still be able to fight for. For days after the scholarship letter incident, the house felt off balance. Emma moved around like someone trying not to touch a bruise. She did her homework quietly, stayed in her room more, and watched Howard with new caution. He behaved as if nothing had happened, as if calling me someone else's problem was just another comment thrown into the air. He still sat in his chair after work. He still ate dinner at the same spot at the table. But something in his eyes had sharpened. as if he knew a mask had slipped, but decided there was no point putting it back on. I carried my mom's letter with me almost everywhere, the original tucked safely into the jewelry box, the copy folded in the back of a notebook I slid into my backpack. When things felt too heavy, I would find a quiet corner, open it, and let myself hear her voice in my head. The section about Michael Hale drew my eyes again and again. She had written his full name, the way it would appear on a business card, and mentioned that he had started some kind of firm in Denver. At 16, I had looked him up online, secretly, at the school library. There were articles about a finance and development company with his name on the door, photos of a man in a dark suit standing beside ribbon cuttings and charity events. I had stared at his face for long minutes, recognizing the line of his jaw in my own reflection, the same shade of blue in his eyes. Back then, he had felt like a ghost walking around in daylight, real but untouchable. After everything with the money and the scholarship, and Howard saying out loud what he really thought of me, that ghost started to feel less like a distant figure and more like someone I needed to meet before my life solidified into something I could not escape. One evening at Aunt Grace's house, I pushed my tea aside and told her I wanted to find him. She studied me for a long moment, her gaze steady and sad. She reminded me that it would not be simple. There would be emotions on both sides, history I did not know, possible rejection. She asked if I was ready for that. I told her I was tired of living in a story where everyone else knew more than I did. I was tired of being the only one in the room with no say in my own life. Grace nodded slowly. She said that as my mom's sister and as an attorney, she had always felt torn about this. But my mom had made one thing clear before she passed. If I ever came asking about Michael, Grace was not to stand in the way. She pulled out a worn file from her office cabinet, the one marked with my mom's name in her neat script. Inside, among medical records and insurance documents, were a few clippings and an old photo, folded and refolded so many times the edges had gone soft. The photo showed my mom when she was young, standing in front of an old brick building with a man beside her. He had an arm around her shoulders, and both of them were laughing at something off camera. Even in the faded colors, I could see the shape of his smile, the hint of the same nose I saw in my mirror every morning. Grace said she had done some quiet checking over the years. Michael still lived in Colorado. His company was based in downtown Denver. He was, by all accounts, very busy and very private. We decided I would not show up at his office unannounced. That felt wrong, too confrontational. Instead, Grace suggested a letter, handwritten like the one my mom had left for me. It took me 3 tries to get it right. The first draft sounded angry. The second sounded like a plea. The third was simple. I told him my name and my age. I told him my mom's name and the years she had lived in this state. I told him there was a good chance I was his daughter and that I was not asking him for money or rescue, only for the truth. I mentioned that my aunt was an attorney and could facilitate a DNA test if he was willing. We sent certified mail to his office. Then we waited. Waiting stretched out time. Every phone call made my heart jump. Every unknown number on Grace's caller ID turned my stomach into a knot. Weeks passed. I graduated high school in a blur, walking across a stage in a borrowed dress, listening to Emma cheer from the bleachers, while Howard clapped politely, already talking about how I needed more hours at the store. I was getting ready for another closing shift when my phone buzzed with a number I did not recognize. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. A calm male voice came through the line, introducing himself as an assistant from Hale Partners. He said Mr. Hale had received my letter. He said Mr. Hale was willing to do a DNA test if I was comfortable with that. He mentioned a reputable lab in Denver and offered several dates. My knees felt weak. I sat on the edge of my bed and pressed my free hand against the mattress to steady myself. I told him yes, I was comfortable. I told him I was ready. We scheduled an appointment at a clinic near downtown, in a building with glass walls and polished floors that squeaked under my thrift store shoes. I went alone during a morning when Howard thought I was at work. A nurse in light blue scrubs took a simple swab from the inside of my cheek and labeled a small vial with my name. They said Michael had already been in the day before to provide his sample. Knowing he had walked those same hallways less than 24 hours earlier sent a strange shiver through me. We were moving through the same spaces now, even if we had not yet stood in front of each other. The results came back about 2 weeks later. I was at Grace's house again when she opened the envelope. She had insisted on having the report sent to her office, said it would be safer that way. We sat at the same table where she had broken the news about the insurance. This time, there was something like hope hovering between us, thin and fragile. She read the letter once to herself, then slid it across to me. The words were dense with scientific terminology, but the key line jumped out in clear language. Probability of paternity was listed as greater than 99.9%. My breath caught. The room seemed to narrow down to that one sentence. I read it again, then a third time, until the numbers imprinted themselves in my mind. "He is your biological dad," Grace said quietly. "There is no doubt." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment, blinking fast so the tears would not spill. It was not exactly a surprise. The letter from my mom, the photo, the faint echo of my own features in his face on the internet had already pointed me in that direction. But having it there, in black and white, made it real in a way nothing else could. A few days after that, my phone rang again with the same Denver number as before. This time, when I answered, the voice on the other end was deeper, older, with a steadiness that wrapped around my name in a way that startled me. He said his name was Michael Hale. He said he had received the test results. He said he had not known about me before my letter, that no one had told him my mom was pregnant. His voice did not crack, but I heard something inside it, like a door opening to a room that had been shut for a long time. He asked if we could meet in person. I wanted to say yes immediately, to jump in the car and drive to Denver and sit across from him and stare at his face and ask every question that had piled up over the years. But another part of me, a quieter and more cautious part, told me to slow down. I was still 17. I was still living under Howard's roof, legally, financially, emotionally. I was in a precarious spot. If Howard found out I was meeting the man he despised in private, his reaction could be dangerous, especially with my birthday and the remaining insurance money so close. So I told Michael the truth. I told him I wanted to meet, but I needed a little time. I told him my 18th birthday was coming in December, and that once I was officially an adult, it would be safer for me to make big decisions without repercussions inside the house. There was a pause. Then he said he understood. He said he would wait. He said he was not going anywhere. After that call, the days leading up to my birthday took on a stretched, anxious quality. I worked extra shifts at the store, saved every tip, stay out of the house as much as I could without drawing suspicion. Howard grew edgier. He checked the mail more obsessively. He spent long evenings at the dining table with stacks of papers and his laptop open, frowning at numbers. In late November, about 3 weeks before my birthday, Grace called me into her office. She had her serious expression on, the one she wore when she had to deliver news that mattered. She said she had been monitoring what she could about the insurance account. It was not since Howard was the official guardian until I turned 18, but certain notifications still went to her as the original attorney who set up the trust. She told me there were signs he was preparing a large withdrawal, one that would wipe out most of what remained. The transaction was pending, scheduled to move just after the date listed as my birthday. If he succeeded, there would be little left to fight over. I sat there, listening to her, feeling the countdown in a new way. My 18th birthday was no longer just a marker of adulthood. It was a deadline in a race I had not agreed to run. For the first time, I understood that waiting quietly might cost me everything my mom had tried to leave behind. Emma had gone quiet as Grace explained the pending withdrawal, but her silence carried a weight that followed us out of the office and all the way home. By the time we stepped through the front door, the December air had already sharpened into something brittle. The house smelled faintly of pine and roasted vegetables, the kind of holiday scent people bottle into candles, except this one came with a knot in my stomach. Howard had insisted we host Christmas Eve dinner. He claimed it was tradition, even though most years he barely spoke to half the relatives who came. I suspected he wanted an audience, the kind of stage where he could perform the role of the good dad while keeping me close enough to monitor. The minute I hung up my coat, His voice carried from the kitchen. He asked where I had been, not gently, not with the curiosity of a parent checking in, but with the tight edge of someone keeping score. I said I had been at Grace's. He grunted the way he always did when he did not like the answer but could not argue openly. Then he pointed at the stove. Pots simmering, roasting pan in the oven, chopped vegetables on the counter. He told me I needed to finish everything before the guests arrive. He said he had worked all day and deserved a break. The unspoken part hung in the air. I was the one who was supposed to handle things. I was the one who was supposed to make it all look smooth. Emma walked in behind me and immediately caught the tension. She asked why I was doing all the cooking. Howard said it was because I had offered. That was a lie. I had not offered anything. I swallowed the urge to push back, partly because fighting him before company arrived was pointless, partly because the dinner needed to be done, and arguing would only waste time. I tied an apron around my waist and started moving between the stove and the counter. The steam warmed my face while cold drafts brushed the back of my neck every time someone opened the door to bring in groceries or decorations. Emma hovered near me, occasionally reaching for a spoon or checking the oven, her presence a small, steady anchor. She leaned close once and whispered under her breath that he was being unfair. I did not answer out loud, but I let myself nod just enough for her to know I heard her. By late afternoon, the house filled with voices. Coats hung on the banister, boots lined up messily near the entryway. The dining room glowed under string lights Howard had insisted on buying, trying to create that warm, family scene he imagined neighbors admired. He laughed too loudly at jokes, slapped backs, poured drinks, smiled in a way that never reached his eyes. People commented on how grown up I looked. They told Howard he must be proud. He beamed at them, saying things like, "She turned out all right," or "I kept her in line," or "She knows hard work because she learned from me." I carried platters to the table and set them down without interrupting. Each compliment felt like a small stone added to the pile already pressing on my chest. Emma watched all of it with tight lips. At one point, she whispered that if there was a trophy for pretending, Howard would win it every year. Dinner began. Plates passed from hand to hand. Conversations layered on top of one another. The table shimmered with candles and silverware, and for a moment, if someone had walked in off the street, they might have thought it was a picture-perfect holiday gathering. But I could feel the cracks under the surface. Howard tapped his fingers against his glass each time he looked my way. His jaw twitched whenever I answered someone directly instead of letting him speak for me. There was something brewing behind his eyes, something waiting for a spark. It came just after dessert had been placed on the table. A small chime sounded from his phone. Howard pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and froze. His expression did not shift all at once. It tightened gradually, like fabric shrinking under heat. He stared at the message longer than necessary, as if hoping the words might rearrange into something less threatening. He set the phone down too hard. The table shook. A few spoons rattled. Conversation around us dimmed. I knew even before he spoke that the message had come from the bank. I had spent the previous week working with Grace to ensure the account linked to the insurance money would transition to my control the moment I turned 18. It was a legal safeguard, something we enacted quietly, something Howard had assumed he could delay or override. He must have just received confirmation that the transition was complete, that the window he had counted on had closed. He looked at me with a fury that felt old and familiar, but sharper now, as if he finally had a target he could hit without hiding. He told me he wanted a word after dinner. His tone was calm enough for the guests not to notice the danger in it. But Emma felt it. Her eyes flicked toward me with worry. Dinner dragged on while I counted my breaths and kept my hands steady around my fork. Every so often, Howard leaned back in his chair and smirked, the kind of smirk that said he knew something, that he believed he still had the upper hand. The room buzzed around him with holiday cheer, but he sat in the center like a storm cloud. Eventually, people began to rise from the table. Someone suggested group photos in front of the tree. Kids ran to the living room to find wrapping paper scraps to play with. Laughter carried down the hallway. Howard stayed seated. He called my name in a voice that cut through the noise. Emma stood beside me as I approached him. He waved her off, telling her this was between him and me. She did not move. She told him that anything affecting me affected her too. That simple sentence seemed to hit him harder than anything else she could have said. He leaned in close, his voice low enough for only the two of us to hear. He asked what I thought I was doing with the account. He asked who had helped me. He asked if I really believed I deserved any of the money my mom had left. I did not answer right away. I let his words settle, like dust swirling around before falling. He raised his voice slightly, repeating the question, demanding a response. I told him the truth, that the money was mine, that the law said so, that he had taken enough already. His face darkened, but before he could say more, someone in the living room called for him to join the family photo. He pushed away from the table abruptly and walked off, plastering a smile onto his face as he stepped into the warm glow of the Christmas lights. Emma and I stood silently in the doorway. The room was filled with people posing for the camera, all angled toward him, as if he were the center point of the picture. He draped an arm around a cousin and laughed for the camera. Emma whispered that he was planning something. I said I knew, and I did know. I could feel it in the way he moved, the way he watched me, the way he clung to the last illusion of control he thought he had. When the photographer finished, Howard turned and looked at me with a cold decision already made behind his eyes. That was when I realized that the blow he intended to land had nothing to do with legal papers or bank accounts. He wanted to humiliate me. He wanted an audience. And tonight, surrounded by family, surrounded by people who believed his version of fatherhood, he finally had both. He finally had both. And you already know how he used them. You know about the $20 on the table, and the way his words cut through the room. You know how I picked up my gloves, stepped outside into the cold, and walked toward the man waiting by the car. What you do not know yet is what happened after the taillights of that house disappeared in the side mirror. The drive from Aurora to Boulder that night felt unreal, like I had slipped out of my own life and into someone else's. The city lights blurred past the windows in long streaks of white and red. My bag sat at my feet, half-zipped, filled with what I could grab quickly, while relatives pretended not to watch. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence was not heavy the way it had been in Howard's house. It was careful, like two people holding something fragile between them. Eventually, Michael cleared his throat and asked if I was warm enough. His voice was deeper in person than it had sounded over the phone, a steady sound that somehow made the highway feel less empty. I said I was fine. My hands were still shaking a little, but I blamed that on the adrenaline and the way my body had not yet caught up with what I had just done. He told me he had rented a small furnished apartment in Boulder for the next few months. Someplace quiet where I could stay while we figured things out. He said he did not want to drag me directly into his main house or his daily life, without asking what I needed, without giving me space. That struck me. I had spent 18 years living in a house where my needs were an afterthought at best. The idea that someone might be trying not to overwhelm me was new. The apartment building sat a few blocks from Pearl Street, modern and glass-fronted, with a lobby that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and coffee. We rode the elevator up in silence. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked pale and small, eyes too wide, shoulders pulled tight. Inside the apartment, everything felt neat and impersonal. A gray couch, a small dining table, art on the walls that looked like it had been chosen from a catalog. He showed me the bedroom that would be mine, with clean sheets and a dresser already empty for my things. He paused in the doorway and said I could lock the door at night if that made me feel safer. He added that I did not owe him trust just because a test said we shared blood, that he understood it might take time. The word trust lodged in my chest. That first night I lay on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. For the first time in my life, the air did not smell like Howard's aftershave or the musty old carpet of the house I grew up in. It smelled like laundry detergent and new paint. I should have felt free. Instead, I felt hollow and restless, like my body had moved, but pieces of me were still trapped back in that dining room. Morning came with a pale winter light slipping around the edges of the blinds. I woke to the sound of someone moving quietly in the kitchen. When I stepped out, wrapped in one of the extra sweaters Aunt Grace had pressed on me before I left, I found Michael standing at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He looked tired, like he had not slept much either. He gestured toward the table, and I sat down, unsure what to do with my hands. He started with the past. He told me about meeting my mom in a cramped coffee shop near the university, when they were both young and hungry for something more. He talked about how she laughed with her whole body, how she argued with Professor, how she refused to let him work himself into the ground without reminding him to eat. He said he had never felt so seen and so challenged at the same time. He told me about the job offer that came in from another state, the one he had wanted so badly, because it meant stepping out of the shadow of older men at the firm. He said he had expected her to come with him. She had expected him to stay. Neither of them said what they truly needed. Pride sharpened everything. A fight turned into a breakup. He left, believing she did not want the same life he did. She stayed, believing he had chosen ambition over her. He ran a hand over his face when he admitted that he never knew she was pregnant. He said if he had known, he would have made a different choice. He did not say it like a line from a movie, polished and rehearsed. He said it like a man who had replayed the same road not taken 1,000 times in the quiet hours of the night. I asked him when he had found out for sure. He told me about my letter arriving at his office, the way his assistant had brought it in with the rest of the mail. He recognized my mom's name immediately. He had sat at his desk for a long time before opening it, afraid of what might be inside, afraid not to know. He said reading my words had felt like being hit by a wave that kept rolling. Even after he thought it had passed, he had gone straight to his legal team and asked them to verify everything, to help arrange the DNA test, to make sure he did not project onto me something that was not real. When the results came back, he had sat alone in his office with the report in his hands for a long time, just like I had done at Grace's table, letting the truth settle. He looked at me across the small kitchen table in that apartment and said that he could not change the years we had lost, but he wanted, if I would let him, to be present for the ones ahead. The lump in my throat made it hard to answer. I told him, slowly, that I did not know how to do this. I had a dad, technically, and that experience had left scars. I was not sure what it meant to let someone else step into that space, even partially. He nodded, said he understood, said we could go one day at a time. In the weeks that followed, that is what we did. He respected my space. He asked before making plans that involved me. Sometimes he would cook a simple dinner and we would sit in the living room, the television on low, talking about small things. Work, school, the way the flatirons looked with snow on them. Other times, we stumbled into deeper territory without meaning to. I would mention something small from my childhood, like how I used to pretend to fall asleep in the car so my mom would carry me inside, and I would see his face twist for a second with the realization that he had not been there for any of that. He did not try to buy my forgiveness. He did not shower me with gifts or grand gestures. Instead, he showed up. He came back to the apartment after long workdays. He called when he said he would. He introduced me to 2 people from his firm who had grown up in difficult homes and gone on to use business as a way out. He listened more than he spoke. A few days after New Year's, he told me he had scheduled a meeting with an attorney who specialized in trusts and family disputes. Not just his corporate lawyers, but someone who understood what it meant when guardians misused money meant for children. He said he wanted me to go with him, if I was ready. The law office sat on an upper floor of a mid-rise building in downtown Denver, with big windows overlooking the city. The attorney, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a calm manner, shook my hand firmly and said she had heard a bit about my situation from both Michael and Grace. We laid everything out. The insurance policy my mom had taken, the documented withdrawals Grace had already gathered, the timing of those withdrawals, the scholarship letter that had somehow ended up under the cabinet instead of in my hands, the way Howard had treated me after my mom died. The attorney listened without interrupting much. She took notes. She asked a few precise questions. When we finished, she said there was a strong basis to demand an accounting. She explained that as of my 18th birthday, I had the right to full information about the trust and every dollar spent in my name. If Howard had misused funds, He could be forced to repay them and possibly face other consequences. Hearing someone put legal words around what I had always felt in my gut was strangely grounding. It made my experiences feel less like private shame and more like facts that could be addressed. The attorney suggested we formally request all statements and documentation from the bank as a first step. She said that having both her office and Grace involved would make it harder for Howard to stall or hide details. That evening, back at the apartment, I sat on the couch with my knees drawn up, watching the lights of Boulder twinkle outside the window. Michael came in with 2 mugs of tea, set them on the coffee table, and told me he had spoken with Grace after the meeting. He said she had gone back through her files and found even more evidence. Old emails from the insurance company, copies of letters my mom had written when she set up the policy, note from conversations about how the funds were meant to be used, only for specific things, never for general household expenses. That was our mini turning point, the moment when my story shifted from surviving what had been done to me into actively seeking a different ending. For the first time, it felt like Howard might be the one standing on thin ice, not me. The weeks that followed moved quickly, faster than I expected for something that had taken years to build underneath the surface. Once the attorney had everything she needed, she drafted a formal demand letter. It was thick, printed on heavy paper with language that did not bend or waver. It listed every questionable withdrawal, every timestamp, every policy violation. It demanded that Howard return $150,000 plus penalties and fees for mishandling a minor's trust. When the letter was delivered, I was sitting at the small dining table in the Boulder apartment, staring at the steam rising from my tea. My phone vibrated before the envelope probably even hit his kitchen counter. He called first, then again, then again. I let each call go to voicemail. His messages sounded frantic, full of clipped breaths and words tumbling over each other. He said he needed to explain. He said he had not meant for things to go this far. He said we could talk it out between us. No lawyers needed. I felt no satisfaction hearing that panic in his voice. What I felt was something quieter, like a door closing in a long hallway. I did not block his number, but I did not pick up. It felt important to leave space between the past and the present. Emma texted me separately. She said Howard had gone pale when he read the letter. She said he paced the kitchen for an hour. She apologized again for not knowing more, for not seeing more, for being a kid when so much was happening. I told her none of this was her fault. She was 14. She was navigating a world that had been shaped by someone else's choices long before she was born. When the attorney scheduled a meeting at her office, I agreed to attend. She said Howard was required to come and that it would not be a trial or a courtroom, just a formal session to present evidence and options. The day of the meeting, the weather in Denver was brittle and bright, sunlight bouncing off thin patches of old snow on the sidewalks. I rode with Michael. He did not crowd me with questions. He drove in silence until we reached downtown, then told me that whatever happened inside that office, I would not face it alone. Howard was already sitting in the conference room when we arrived. He looked smaller somehow, as if the space around him had grown, while he stayed the same. His shoulders were hunched. His hair was uncombed. His hands shook when he reached for a glass of water. He looked up at me with this strange mixture of indignation and desperation. He said my name softly, like he thought that tone might undo something. I sat on the opposite side of the table, a stack of organized files between us. The attorney opened the session professionally. She presented the records, one by one, outlining the pattern of withdrawals from the trust over 5 years. Each page she turned felt like a light switching on in a dark room. Howard tried to argue. He claimed the money had been used for household expenses. He claimed I had benefited from it. He claimed there had been emergencies, repairs, medical costs that required immediate attention. But the numbers did not match his excuses. The dates did not match the events he described. The amounts did not match any records he could provide. When the attorney revealed that the trust specifically barred the guardian from using funds for general household expenses, his face went slack. When she revealed the dates when I had been forced to pay my own phone bill, my own school supplies, and even my share of groceries, he stopped talking altogether. The final blow came when she brought out the copy of the scholarship letter Emma had found under the cabinet. She stated that the university had already confirmed that due to a clerical error, issue on their end, they would allow me to reapply for the financial interview. I watched as Howard's attempt at a defense unraveled like thread pulled from a hem. By the time the meeting ended, the agreement was clear. He had 90 days to repay the full amount, or legal action would proceed. He signed the documents with a shaky hand. He refused to look at me as he left the room. I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. There is a difference. One burns out quickly. The other stays with you. Outside the building, in the crisp winter air, Michael asked if I was all right. I told him I was. He seemed to believe me. In the months that followed, small pieces of my life began to knit themselves together. The university reinstated my scholarship interview. I applied again, this time using the correct paperwork. A few weeks later, I received a thick envelope with an offer inside. A partial scholarship, renewable each semester based on grades and involvement. I held the letter in my hands the way some people hold a fragile ornament, afraid it might shatter if I breathed too hard. Emma visited me in Boulder a few times. She apologized often, until I told her she needed to stop carrying guilt that never belonged to her. I told her I wanted her in my life, but I would need time before I could navigate anything involving Howard. She nodded. She said she understood. She hugged me a little longer than usual when she left. Howard did not contact me again after the meeting. I learned from Grace that he eventually paid the full amount he owed, submitting the repayment in one lump sum a few days before the deadline. I did not ask where he got the money. Some questions are better left unanswered. A year passed quietly. I adjusted to living with someone who cared without conditions. I learned the rhythm of Boulder, the way the air felt different near the foothills, the way the sky stretched wide at dusk. I learned what it felt like to decorate a room without worrying if someone would ask why I bothered. I learned what it felt like to wake up in a place that did not require me to shrink to fit it. When the next Christmas approached, I felt something unfamiliar. Not dread, not fear, something close to peace. On the morning of Christmas Eve, I drove with Michael to visit my mom's grave. The sky was soft and gray, the kind of winter light she used to call gentle weather. We walked through the quiet cemetery, the sound of our boots pressing into the cold grass. I knelt beside her headstone and brushed away a few fallen pine needles. I told her about school. I told her about Emma. I told her about the apartment, the scholarship, the long road between who I used to be and who I was becoming. Michael stood a few steps behind me, giving me space, but staying close enough that I felt his presence. When I finished speaking, he placed a hand on my shoulder, warm and steady. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the quiet settle around us. Not the heavy kind of quiet from the past, the healing kind. As we walked back to the car, I realized something simple and true. My life had not been broken beyond repair. It had been bent, twisted, strained, but not destroyed. And now it was growing in a different direction. One I chose. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.